back in 2015, I preached a sermon entitled, Who Goes There? An Exploration of Identity. Now that was back when I was preaching without a script or notes and just letting the many, many images that I would have on the wall lead me in the sermon. And I pulled from lots of research and my own background with some discussion of stage identity development that I used to teach in my classes back at Georgia Southern when I taught human growth and development. And also I use more of my recent explorations of identity related to ethnicity and gender and race. I watched it again recently. It's a good message. And if you want to know more about those things, I encourage you to go to my sermons page, which you can find on our website, and scroll all the way down to the sermons that Costco Globin used a video for me back in the day, you remember. And click on that one from January 2015. Because that's not what you're going to hear about today. I've sometimes admitted to you that I often preach sermons that I need to hear. And I just let you listen in on them, you know. And in terms of my identity, those things I preached in 2015, although still very important, just didn't seem to fit my needs in 2023. You see, I've been thinking more recently about transitioning in a few years to a chapter of my life that many of you know about already, and others are looking forward to, or not, one that we label as retirement. I wonder, who will I be? Who will I be? So I've been exploring about how our identities change, not just our roles and jobs, but our identities as we grow older. What is our core identity? What about our identity as static, the same throughout our lifetime? And what is dynamic, fluid, shifting to someone different than you were? Are you the same person you were in your 20s and 30s? Are you? Probably not. I'm glad I'm not. At some point in my first marriage, my husband noted that I changed a lot about the way I thought about things from when we married. And I said, well, I hope so. I was 17 when we got married. And he said, we are married though, so we should think alike. Yeah. I said, well, if that's the case, you're welcome to think as I do. But I can't go back and think like I did when I was 17. I'm not that person anymore. This is who I am now, I told him. He never could adjust to that. And we eventually ended the marriage when he found someone who did think more like him. For this sermon, I'm going to explore two issues that all of this brings up for me, and maybe for you. What makes me, me, and you, you? And how does our identity shift and change as we grow older? Question one, what makes me me? What are components of my identity? Well, of course, experts have weighed in on this. Some note that we often define ourselves by our physical characteristics based on categories that are generally accepted in the societies where we live. My height is probably 5'2" and decreasing. Most folks would categorize me as a short person, and I've decided to own that. My body parts at birth had the nurse shared with my mama that she had a girl. So I was assigned female at birth, and I retained that female biological identity. My hair has turned silver, and I own that too. I like to call it silver, not gray. Our society does allow us to change that, of course. And it's up to you what you want to do. My eyes are blue and my skin is fair. I'm 72 years old and I own that as well. These and other physical characteristics are more static areas of our identity, not completely, of course. We've learned that we can change some of this as well. Usually when we think of identity, though, we think of more socially constructed categories, social identity categories like race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, ability, religion, spirituality, nationality, and socioeconomic status. Of course, more recently, scholars like Kimberly Crenshaw have made us aware of the intersections of these identities, intersectionality, which can have implications related to oppression and more. We also have identities related to our roles in life. I identify as a family member to many, a friend, a minister, an activist, and more. And of course, as indicated by my conversation I shared about between me and my first husband, we identify by our values, our character, by the way we think and feel and act. Which of these are central to me being me? Philosophers have played mind games with folks about this. I heard one of these that's commonly used on a video I watched while I was preparing for these sermons, and I'd heard it before, but it reminded me of it. And it had to do with whether or not, and you probably heard this too, whether or not you would still be you if you lost some of these characteristics. Would you still be you? For example, if you lost all your hair, would you still be you? Of course. What about a body part, like an arm or a leg? Of course, you would still be you. How much of your physical self could be removed and you still be you? Give me a moment to think about that and see what you would say. Most folks, they say, put the brain at the center because that's where they locate their thoughts. Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. But what part of your thinking exemplifies the real you? What if you got hit on the head and the injury removed your ability to read? Would you still be you? Well, yes, of course. But what if you lost your memories? Are we what? We remember? Well, someone may have to remind you of things every day, or you might have to read journals. But if you still thought in the same ways, wouldn't you still be you? What part of your brain and thinking is that core? Some people call that your character. It's how they would describe your personality. Perhaps someone who is shy or outgoing, someone who's frugal, someone who's compassionate, someone who's curious, and more. And in fact, in these mind games, if we had to choose between losing our memories or losing our character, the way we think and feel about things, most of us would probably prefer to keep our character. That's who we are. For some of us, this helps us feel better about death. For our bodies are not us, they don't last. Ashes to ashes, as folks just said if they went through the little Lent exercises. Our names won't be remembered for most of us. But these ideas, these thoughts, these character attributes that have been riding around in our brains and bodies will continue in our species with other people. And just as I've been contemplating ideas about identity more recently by long gone philosophers like Descartes and John Locke, or contemporary thinkers like Beverly Crenshaw, those same ideas will be explored and contemplated and acted on by others. Our bodies, including our brains, are just the vehicles for these ideas to be contemplated, maybe expanded on, maybe shared with others. The most important part of our identities doesn't die with us. They may die with the extinction of humanity, of course, or perhaps be carried forth by artificial intelligence. Okay, question 2. How does our identity shift and change as we grow older? We have the same DNA throughout our lifetime. One metaphor for this is same seed, different ground. We plant that DNA seed in different soils as we grow in development. And I don't mean just geographically, soils in knowledge and understanding that we get, soil in the folks that we hang out with, and the events and activities in our lives. One of my classmates one time, when she saw me speaking up on a topic she disagreed with, said, "Jane, I don't know why you're like that. You grew up here in Statesboro, just like the rest of us, you know, in the same time period. It's not the rest of us. And you've really never moved away much at all. You've been right here. I don't know what happened to you." What? She said, "What happened to you?" I said, "I read." We put ourselves in different soils in different ways. You know that a Texas onion seed that's planted in southeast Georgia turns into a Vidalia sweet onion. It tastes completely different. Same seed, different soil. We change as we age, both due to our DNA and due to our environment. Of course, it's easy to see the physical transformation that aging brings. Your thin skin, if y'all haven't noticed it, but I sure have, your skin gets thin. If you get a little scratch or something, it doesn't heal up as easy and it bleeds, you know, your skin gets thin, it loses elasticity. Our gums recede, our noses grow, hair disappears from some places and grows in other places. And as I previously noted, we get shorter. Some of us get wider. And we also change other aspects of our identity as we become what many of us refer to as seniors. For quite some time, folks thought that identity formation occurred till about 30 years old or so. I one time heard somebody say you mature at about 28, it lasts for 30 minutes. But your identity formation occurred till about 30 years or so. And then we were pretty static. And in fact, my Myers-Briggs values of ENTJ, which is extroverted, intuitive thinking and judging, have not changed as I've aged when I take that same test. But more recent research shows us that this is not entirely the case. The conclusion is exactly this: we are not the same person for the whole of our lives, says Renee Mose, a psychologist from the University of Edinburgh who studied this extensively. An article by Zaria Gorbett, published by BBC.com, shares a summary of findings from his work and others. Our traits are ever shifting, and by the time we're in our 70s or 80s, we've undergone a significant transformation. And while we're used to couching aging in terms of deterioration and decline, the gradual modification of our personalities has some surprising upsides. We become more conscientious and more agreeable, less neurotic. The levels of the dark triad personality traits of Machiavellianism, narcissism, psychopathy, all those kind of things tend to go down. And with them, our risk of antisocial behaviors, such as crime and substance abuse. Now, I was thinking as I was reading some of this, that perhaps it's just that the ones of us who make it this far have learned to be better about those things. But research has shown that we develop into more altruistic and trusting individuals. Our willpower increases and we develop a better sense of humor. Finally, the elderly have more control over their emotions. It's arguably a winning combination and one which suggests that the stereotype of older people as grumpy and curmudgeonly needs some revision.
Yeah.
Far from being fixed in childhood or around the age of 30, as experts thought for years, it seems that our personalities are fluid and malleable. People become nicer and more socially adapted, said Motis. They're increasingly able to balance their own expectations with societal demands. Psychologists call the process of change that occurs as we age personality maturation. Personality maturation. It's a gradual, imperceptible change that begins in our teenage years and continues at least until our 8th decade on the planet. At least. My mama, who's 96, says she thinks it even continues beyond that. Intriguingly, it seems to be universal. The trend is seen across all human cultures, from Guatemala to India. Now, it would be reasonable to think that this continuing process of change would make the concept of personality fairly meaningless, but that's not entirely true, because there are two aspects of personality change. There's average changes, and then there are relative changes. It turns out that while our personalities shift in a certain direction as we age, well, what we're like relative to other people in the same age group tends to remain fairly static. Fairly stable. So, for instance, if Alice seems more agreeable than Sally when they're 40, she will probably still seem more agreeable than Sally when they're 70, though they both may have shifted and improved their level of agreeability. I'll take that. That's good news. Now, there are things we may need to change about our identities, and we can. Just as I had to make the change of my characteristic of being so high energy, as I shared with the children in the story for all ages, we can make changes as we face different challenges in our lives. Many do seem to learn to cope, though that's not to say that they're not also, and we recognize there is often some despair with aging and with transitioning to different roles anytime in your lifetime, etc. Now, as you may have noted in my introduction, that upcoming role change for me has given me a bit of motivation to try to shift some of my identity gradually so it won't be such a shock when I retire. I've had friends that retired and then went into deep depression, or retired and died, you know? As your book of life goes along, you have different chapters, and it's helpful to, if you know ahead that big changes are coming, so you can prepare. Of course, you don't always know, of course. I mean, you may get fired from your job, or you may have a loved one that suddenly dies. You can't prepare for everything. But there are some transitions that you know are coming and you can prepare for. Several years before I became your minister, I felt called to move in this ministerial direction and began my preparation. First becoming a lay minister at Pittman Park Church, then coming to this congregation and getting actively involved and gradually doing many of the things that ministers do. Not too long after I began my studies at Meadville Lombard Theological School, I stepped down from the very demanding role of department chair at Georgia Southern. I continued to share with others some of the research I had done, but I took on no new research projects. I even took my first sabbatical ever at Georgia Southern in 2004 so that I could do my own site pastoral care preparation at Northside Hospital in Atlanta and take some additional multicultural courses that would help me both in my final year at Southern and in my ministry. After I retired in 2005, I began a year-long internship with the congregation in Augusta, which gave my car a chance to prepare for this transition, you know, and would not just automatically go out to Georgia Southern. I was able to prepare for this transition. It was not that difficult, but I did it over a period of time. And you know what? I do not miss being a professor and spending my time and energy at that university. I don't even go to the football games anymore. And being a big fan was one time a central part of my identity. But I couldn't even tell you the name of the coach now. When I transitioned to ministry, I was blessed to have time to prepare for the transition. Can I do that again? I hope so, with your help, because we will all need to transition. I'll need to transition from being your minister to being a member, being one of you. And you will need to transition to either a new minister or new kinds of ministry. So I've decided to build in some practice time for us. I'm going to take a mini sabbatical from mid-May to mid-June this year. Greg and I have rented a flat in London.
Oh,
And I'm going to try my best to go there and learn and grow in ways that will help me in my remaining years as your minister and in transitioning to retirement. My plan, you know about plans, but my plan is to continue as your minister until June 30th, 2026. And that all depends, of course, on the health of my mind and body and on whether or not you want me to continue that long. But it's helpful in any case to try to be intentional about the changes that will occur. I'm very appreciative that our Committee on Shared Ministry, our board, and others are energetic about helping us all with this transition as our roles and identities shift. Yes, our identities are not static. No, they indeed are fluid. We can shift and thankfully still be UUs, because UUs honor and lift up and celebrate transformation. It's now one of our core shared values. They did change the word, Martha, are you here? From evolution to transformation. They heard you. Okay. So it's one of our core values, right? Beloveds, may we learn together to swim along gracefully with the fluidity of our identities as they stream together and eventually become part of that big sea of love. May it be so.